There, I'm on.
Oh, there it goes. Okay. All right, call to order. Roll call, please.
Chairperson Ferguson,
Here.
Member Bagwell,
Here.
Member Mayhorn, Member Molina, Member Wells. A quorum is present.
Thank you. Item number 3 of the agenda is public comment. Do we have any public comment?
I see no public comment.
Okay, thank you. Up for possible action is approval of the minutes from the audit committee meeting dated December 8th, 2020. Any comments?
I move approval of the minutes with the correction on item 7 to indicate 3:30 instead of 1:30.
Fair enough.
Second as amended.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Gotta turn on the voting. Boom. All right. With that, minutes are approved. Up for possible action is adoption of today's agenda. Any comments, changes to the agenda today?
No.
Okay, thank you. We don't vote on that, right? It's just, we're good to go. Okay, item 6 is meeting items up for possible action, discussion and possible action regarding the internal audit recommendations to the City Fleet Maintenance Department.
Have a disclosure.
Okay,
NRS 281A 420 requires me to disclose a conflict of interest and abstain from voting when I have a disqualifying conflict. My son works for Eide Bailey. I have previously abstained from voting on the award of the contract to Eide Bailey because I believe that the independence of judgment of a reasonable person in my position could be materially affected by my relationship with my son, who, although he did not and does not currently have any direct involvement in Carson City audits, could in general be impacted as an employee by the awarding of contracts. Here, however, the contract has already been awarded, and the item before us now only involves giving direction by the board as a whole for purposes related to remediations or audits presented, and therefore is a routine function and does not materially affect the independence of my judgment based on my relationship with my son. And NRS 281A 420 requires abstention only in clear cases. I do not have a disqualifying conflict and will be voting on this matter.
okay, thank you, Mayor Bagwell.
You're welcome.
Sherry?
All right. I'm actually going to turn this over to Audrey Donovan. She is our audit manager for the vehicle fleet operations. So they did the procedures over there, and we'll let them talk about their findings.
Okay, great, thanks. Audrey? Thanks for joining.
See, you're there.
Audrey, can you hear us? Is Nicholas on?
Kim Higgins is.
Hi, Sure, I'm on. Audrey's
Okay,
on too.
here
but
I
can't-
am.
There we
Can you
go.
guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, yeah. I guess you have to go into participant instead of audio and video. I'm still learning WebEx. But hi, everyone. Thank you, Audit Committee Chair and Audit Committee and Sherry Russell for turning this over to me, and happy to tell you that we have completed the internal audit of the city's vehicle fleet operations. And at this time, I'd like to thank Dan Stuckey, who I thought was going to be joining us from Public Works today, in place for Darren Schultz. So this audit was identified as part of our annual risk assessment process that Eide Bailey performs. And we delivered this audit on time and on budget, which we typically do, but it's always good to note. And I'm sure you'll find that this internal audit was robust and addressed all the audit program objectives. And these were approved by the audit committee, and you'll see that included in the report in the section, quote, objective and scope of the audit report. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Nick Sidikovic, who was the manager on this audit, and he will walk us through the report. Nick?
And I'm just going to
Right,
note
thank
real
you,
quick.
Audrey, I appreciate it.
This is
Yes,
Sherry.
please.
I'm just going to note real quick. Dan Stuckey is here in the room with us, as well as Lucia,
Oh.
the transportation manager.
Thank
That's
you.
great. Once again, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nick. I am associated with Audrey Donovan at Bailey. I was the lead on this engagement, and I would like to give you a brief overview what we focused on and what we found and some areas of improvement. As Audrey mentioned, we performed an assessment of the vehicle fleet operations, primarily focusing on internal controls and general operations of the fleet. And more specifically, we analyzed the daily function of the fleet services department that rolls up to the city's transportation division. Our assessment of the business processes and the procedures employed by the fleet services were based on the procedures that were still in place in fiscal year 2020, just for clarification. As a result of this assessment and review, if you will, we identified about 6 areas of improvement, which are on our report. They are documented as findings, 6 findings. If you happen to have a copy of the report by chance, our documentation of findings and associated recommendations are, they start documented starting on page 8. And out of those 6, only 1 actually was rated high from the risk perspective, and that was around inventory security and tracking. And inventory in this context is related to specifically inventory of the auto parts or parts for vehicles and equipment. Our findings were included but not limited to, and again, inventory tracking, segregation of duties for life check handling for the assets that are sold by the fleet, periodic asset utilization reviews, and verification of commercial driver licenses, and so on. So that's kind of in a general nutshell. Unless I have anybody questions or comments, I'd like to turn over to Dan for any comments or questions.
Okay.
So is Dan, why don't you just come up, Dan? Because if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm thinking that we could just, let's talk about each one and the city's response, and then what we see is either accepting and closing, accepting and keeping open, accepting and recommend, so that we can do as it indicates on the motion as to where we're gonna go, because I think some are, as indicated by the auditors, of higher importance than others, and just because we have a recommendation doesn't mean we're going to implement something. So I'd really like to understand whether you think we're gonna actually implement or not implement. So if we start with number 1, let me get to page 8. And really, it's management's response, right? So on this one, hate to use a thing, but I saw this kind of like the tire gate, right? Is they're not finding that we're doing anything inappropriate, but it lends itself to an opportunity for assets to be ordered or, this is an area that was marked high. And I see that the response from management is you're requesting a position for the FY22 budget to be able to handle this item. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So I think we should accept this, and then either the Board of Supervisors will grant it the position or not. I mean, it's a pretty open-ended yes or no. They get the position to deal with it or not. So I like number 1, unless somebody sees something different here.
Well, and if the board doesn't accept the position, there's always mitigating controls that we can talk about, at the next board meeting and do something
what
different.
else.
So, yeah.
Mhm. But the first level is to ask for a position, is what you're saying would solve this. And then maybe we just ask the audit team, is that what you saw when you audited this item? That you really do believe it needs a position to check everything?
Audrey, do you want me to take that
Hi.
question? Or
Hi,
you'd like-
Sherry. This is Audrey. To respond to that, it was a recommendation regarding the inventory controls, and we leave it up to management really to determine the best way to perform that corrective action. And we agree with management's response there. And we also agree with Sherry, there may be other ways. If the funding doesn't come through, we're happy to talk with management on ways that would also help mitigate that risk. But we really like to leave it up to management to determine the best course of action to address the risk that was identified in this audit. And in this case, we support management's recommendation.
And it's probably good to note, the last time we did the fleet audit, which I think was 14 or 12. Anyway, the last time we did the fleet audit, they did bring this inventory up and suggested that we get an employee at that time as well. However, that was kind of the worst time of the Great Recession. And so it was not no, but no.
We have no money.
Yeah,
Right, we have no money.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
So-
what, just real quick, Dan, what other solutions were, I mean, besides adding a head, and I don't know if this is like a full-time job, but what other solutions did we look at? There's technology out there that can help with some of this with asset tracking
Yeah,
and so
so we we do, I mean, really, we have staff that's doing everything out there and they're fully utilized. They're fixing vehicles, they're checking out parts, they're doing purchase orders, those types of things, ordering parts. So fully utilized there. We did look at, we're actually rolling out a barcode scanning system in our sewer, water parts, stormwater parts warehouse. Right now, we're getting that set up. We do have that technology available. It's kind of a pilot right now for that warehouse. We're going to see how that works. I think we'd like to incorporate it over into fleet, which I think it won't solve maybe all of this, but it would help aid and kind of adding an extra layer there of tracking and managing inventory. So that's one thought that we had, but we kind of want to test it out. We also just, and I know Mayor Bagwell knows this, we have an asset management program that we have incorporated over in fleet. It's working. We've incorporated really citywide in a lot of to manage and track our assets. Fleet is a very unique division. It requires its own unique software and those types of things. So far, Ready Assets works pretty well to help with that, but it's not something we would completely cross off the list if we had to go to another solution in the future to better utilize. We just don't want to commit to that until we fully integrate Ready Asset, our asset management software, into our processes and test it out. So that's what we're looking at.
Okay. Just in general, have there been issues in the past where, there's inventory parts that have been bought and we can't locate them? Has that ever been an issue before?
I don't, when we check things, do our reconciliations and stuff, I think everything checks out really well. It's never been an issue that we've had here, at least to my knowledge. I haven't been here a super long time, but no, I mean, I don't believe it's ever been a major issue at all.
Okay.
I can tell you in finance, we do an inventory adjustment every single year to, get rid of the waste or lost stuff, and it's always very small.
Okay. Last question on this are there people that have access to the inventory that also do the purchasing, like that sign off on the POs and stuff like that? What I'm looking for, is there a segregation of duties, or is there somebody that could, order something, potentially, make it disappear and not be detected? So do we have an adequate separation of duties between the purchasing of the parts and then access to the parts and inventory?
Lucia Maloney's our transportation manager, and she was really the lead behind a lot of this audit. So Lucia, if you want to come up here and respond. But my understanding is there is some separation of duties. We have, our fleet technicians that are going in there and getting parts and working on vehicles. And, there is kind of a layer. We have management that's reviewing these and checking all of this, but there is human error and there's those types of things. So we have some layers built in that I think are good. But I think it could be taken to another level. And obviously that's what we're trying to do with the person that we're requesting through the budget process.
Okay.
Lucia Maloney, Transportation Manager. Thank you.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you. Although those controls are built in, we have a different person that approves the work orders from the person that's entering the work orders using the parts. So there are layers of control built in, but because there's not a dedicated person to manage the inventory, that responsibility is shared across the mechanics and the administrative person that we have up front. If she is there up front Monday through Thursday, she's gone on Friday, and then the technicians cover that role. So we don't have a single person there 5 days a week to manage receipt of the parts, putting them into inventory, and using those parts. So potentially there is crossover by the same person.
Okay. And then, like, as far as a response, how do you see, is this a full-time position? And what do you see this role, like primary responsibilities other than just, the overall inventory? How do you see that role working?
So since the 2015 audit, we've gone from managing something like, I want to say it was 400 and something piece of equipment to in 2020, we're up to close to 600 with no additional mechanics. And so right now the mechanics are, like Dan said, they're doing the work orders, they're checking out the parts, they're ordering the parts, they're potentially receiving the parts. And so there's a lot of administrative duties that they're covering. So should we be able to have that supplemental person to manage the inventory, there'd be additional control on that side, but it would also relieve that administrative burden from the mechanics so they could actually be working on that additional vehicles and equipment that the city maintains. So we do think there's enough work there for that additional person, and there will be additional efficiencies gained on the mechanic side.
Okay, good. Ernie?
Nope, I'm good with it.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Oh, just real quick question to Ide Bailey. Nick, upon identifying this issue, how much additional test work did you guys do?
It didn't add too many additional procedures. We just it required performing more of a thorough evaluation. Are we still talking about inventory tracking, correct?
Yeah, I was just wondering when, once you identify a weakness, typically you expand the scope of the test work. Did you guys expand the scope of the test work based on identifying this weakness?
Not necessarily, no. For us to even expand the testing, if we call it attribute testing in our world, we need to have controls in place to begin with. So if there's no control or mechanism for tracking, there's nothing to test. So just want to reiterate that adding staff may be very beneficial. However, that alone will not solve a problem. Where we try to emphasize is that at the same time, while trying to determine if we need additional staff, we need to consider creating, designing, and developing and implementing a very robust mechanism for tracking the auto parts inventory. So had there been tracking from the get-go, that would allow us to test it. So in this case, the mechanism is not in place, so there's nothing to test for tracking purposes.
Okay, but typically, I mean, I don't know, I'm going back to my internal audit days. When internal auditors identify a situation where there's no controls in place, typically they expand the scope of the testing to actually follow up to see if, and it's usually like a limited sample or, make sure that things haven't gone totally awry. Did you guys do any actual inventory tracing, like from,
Yes, yes, we did. We did look at a sample of actually assets, not only work orders, but also assets like assets purchased, either vehicles or equipment that were uh, purchased and disposed in the fiscal year 2020. So we'll look at the sample invoices, records, and the ready asset fleet management software. We trace it back all the way to financial accounting and reporting records. That those checked out okay.
okay,
For inventories, we looked at the number of sample work orders, to ensure those auto parts have been utilized, in particular on those assets that have been repaired by fleet services. So those checked out okay as well.
okay, good. That's helpful. That's what I was looking for. Thanks.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay, finding 2.
So, if I may, on this one, it looks like we're agreeing to it and we've already done the corrective action. And so I just recommend we accept and close because it's a simple thing to redirect the checks to the treasurer's office, and we've already changed our documentation, and it was a good catch, and for a change, easily implemented and didn't cost us any money to
Agreed.
implement it. I like those kind
Agreed,
even
yes.
better, so I just recommend
100%.
we accept and close this one because it just changed the form to direct where the payment goes.
Okay. I agree.
We
Looks
need
good.
more like that, like I said. Let's get more.
Next one was finding 3 on the asset utilization.
So on this one, you would be able, right after June 30th, or closely thereafter, you'll be able to bring it back and say that you did the annual review. So it shouldn't be a hard one for us to accept. Is that right? And then
Yeah, it
close?
shouldn't be hard to accept. Sorry. Yeah, it shouldn't be hard to accept. We might want to move the timing of this to during the budget so that we know we're getting our, fleet maintenance and the VEUs and all that correct. So we might want to do the timing of this during the budget when we kind of do that anyway. We go through every asset and make sure it's in the right department, and but yes, we should be able to come back in June and close
So
that.
accept and open, leave open.
Yes.
Unless that's okay with everyone else, we would accept and keep that
Another
one
question
open.
for Nick, just on this finding here. How much test work did you guys do here? And how did you determine, like, what was the extent of the asset low usage? Was it fairly extensive, or was there just certain particular, small percentage of assets that weren't utilized, or was it more broad, or you couldn't determine?
Yeah, fleet services perform actually a fairly robust review of the assets. Where we found opportunity for improvement is to make the review of their assets utilizations more frequently. At the moment, the review has been performed by 2 different supervisor level individuals every 2 to 3 years. So we thought best practice would be, to align that review of assets with the finance and accounting who do the reconciliation on an annual basis, to make it this control review at least annually. As far as the scope of the reviews, fleet services review and then entire inventory based on the miles used, areas where they are being utilized. And in addition, to ensure effective use of the assets, there's fairly close communication between the stakeholders, namely Fleet Services Transportation Division and supervisors from other divisions and departments if there's a need for assets that not being currently used in Department A to transfer to Department B to ensure their effective use.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
No problem.
Questions, comments?
So can I clarify a little bit, Sherry? The management response here is as close to June 30th. Are you suggesting that it's really better we're doing this in March, April every year because we're going to purchase vehicles, dispose of vehicles? In the budget process, they transfer this one to the Parks Department, you know?
Yeah, I would say more January, February, because that's like the beginning of the budget process when we're looking and we're verifying every vehicle is in the correct department for the next fiscal year. So if this could happen mid-year, then we could get everything in line for the next fiscal year.
And that-
If we
All
do
of
it
our
June
reports
30th,
would
it's kind of
match.
too late.
Mhm.
And if we move things around, then everything's gonna be not quite right. Do you think that's doable more in the winter?
Maybe Lucia's gonna go, wait a minute, what else do I do in January and February?
I apologize. So just to clarify, so what we talked about with Nick was pulling the utilization on June 30 to represent the end of the fiscal year. Because it's a living asset management database, it's constantly updated, so to get that snapshot in time. And then the assessment would occur sort of in the fall and winter, what Sherry is saying, and we'd be making recommendations as we're preparing those draft budgets at a staff level, like in December and January, in advance of the following fiscal year.
Okay.
So that was the thought.
So you're
We're on the
using
same page.
June
Gotcha.
30's report to inform the following budget round?
That's correct. The idea of the June 30 date was to get a snapshot from Ready Asset, the asset management software, to pull that end of fiscal year, and we added the as practical if it, say, ended on a Saturday.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you'd be using the data from 6 months prior?
Yeah.
To build, right?
Yeah.
It always is rolling.
Right.
Okay,
Yep,
all right, that works.
thanks.
Works.
Okay, any other comments, questions on number 3? Number 4, monitoring for driving violations.
I think I have the most questions on this one. It looks to me that while we're accepting their overall comment, we're not actually going to implement. It would be a will watch. And if something in the future comes up in which we see a lot of accidents or issues arising, then that would trip a management discussion on GPSs. So I think that's why I wanted to go through these individually to say, we're accepting it as a general recommendation, and they did the audit correctly to say, hey, it's a good thing that you might want to consider, but that the city is actually not going to implement this and close it. And I want to make sure I'm understanding and that we're all understanding this the same way and agree that that's the correct procedure we want to recommend to the Board of Supervisors.
That is correct, too. Good explanation. Thank you.
Everybody okay with it? Good.
Question for Nick and Audrey. Is it, like, what's the standard here for other cities that you guys audit? Do most of the fleets have GPS tracking? With this, with technology these days, I don't know how much it costs, but it doesn't seem like it would be that expensive of a tool to implement.
Dan, Second Deputy Public Works Director. So there is we did put some costs in this report, and it talks about, to get, all of our current fleet all equipped with the GPS, it's about $100,000 for the devices, but then there's the monthly service to track it, right? So that's really the cost I think a lot of people forget about, but that's $120,000. So when you combine the two together, it's a pretty substantial cost. I think that's why we looked at it from a cost benefit scenario. We really have a low amount of instances where we've had any issues. Our vehicles are badged, so pretty easy to see if a Carson City vehicle is causing problems. And from a cost benefit standpoint, it just didn't really check out for us. And
Okay.
yeah. So
Yeah,
to answer your
220
question about cost.
220 seems high. Is that, did we look at a fair number of companies that do that? Or was it like, how did you guys come up with that cost? 2 quotes?
2 quotes.
Okay. And then Nick or Audrey, what's the standard out there? Like, do most cities our size have GPS tracking on their vehicles, or no? As kind of like a benchmark.
Audit Committee Chair, this is Audrey, and it's really hit or miss. It's going to depend on the budget for the size of your city and for that particular department vehicle fleet. But we do see a rising trend with vehicle fleet utilizing the GPS device more and more, especially since the technology was available several years ago. The cost is starting to come down, and we would recommend that the department continue to look at those costs, and when they do become not advantageous. What is the word for that? When it
Effective.
becomes
Effective.
effective, thank you. When it becomes alignment with them, then I think it's important for them to evaluate it at that time. But yes, we are starting to see more and more.
And one thing to consider for a potential offset is that typically insurance companies will give you a rate decrease if you have GPS tracking on your vehicles. I know, at least personally, if you do that, if you want to,
Yeah, our auto program is pretty much self-insured. We have a
Okay.
really high deductible, so it doesn't,
okay.
it's not gonna really
Still
affect
on
that.
us.
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
Thanks, though.
Yeah.
I agree. It would be a good thing if we were,
What percentage of our vehicles have GPS, roughly? We talking 5, 10, 40, 50%? 10%?
yeah, maybe
Not a very
10%.
high percentage, okay.
Would work. I'm just curious, do police and fire have GPS? No?
Not all of them, no. We
Okay.
only have like 10%, so. Police is probably 40% of our vehicles, though, right?
Just operationally from like a, emergency response standpoint, is there value in having GPS tracking for emergency response vehicles?
And I could definitely see some value. I mean, I think that would be obviously a sheriff's office, fire department discussion. But yeah, I mean, there are definitely some benefits.
Okay. Other questions, comments, Lori or Ernie?
Yeah, are there any grants available for things like that?
No
Considering
idea.
public safety? I don't know, I just thought.
Yeah, I don't know. I can talk to our grants administrator in my office and have her look around and see if they're available.
It seems valuable, but. it
Yeah, the
depends.
problem
Yeah,
is
I get
not the
that.
cost of the original equipment, which is probably what the grant would be for. It's the ongoing cost of
Right,
120 grand a year,
No,
so,
I see that.
yeah.
Okay, good.
Did I hear you right, Sherry? You said it's ongoing cost of 120 a year?
That's what's in the report.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm looking at that right now. 220. I thought it was split with 100,000 for GPS device and 20 for the service, but yeah, thank you.
No problem.
Okay, anything else on 4? All right, number 5, verification of the CDL and driver's licenses.
So this one, I think L'Oreal mentioned that we should close because
We did it.
our risk manager has implemented the procedure. It's just getting the actual copy of the CDL driver's license
Okay.
and keeping it in her file, where she used to just call and say, hey, is it updated? Yes or no?
Yeah,
And she's gonna actually keep a copy
we
on file
talked to
now.
her today and she's already done it. I'm like, well,
Yeah,
I don't think we could ask for much more than that. Call
Right.
it implemented. I'm like, yay. She's does a really good job. She saw the recommendation and said, that's great,
Good.
and already did it. So I do think we should accept and close number 5.
Okay,
And again, I'm very happy because that also did not cost us any money.
right.
Just a good employee, quick to implement.
Speaking of closing, did we want to close 4 too, because we're not gonna buy the
Mm-hmm.
GPS? Okay.
So far, I'm just showing 2, 4, and 5. We're accepting all and closing 2, 4, and 5.
Okay. And then 6 is the training.
Yep, 6, training for drivers and operators.
So this one, we have a citywide safety manual, but it's very high level. So it's kind of up to the departments to track their own training. However, we can have Cecilia maybe have once a year them send those training logs to us so that somebody's holding the departments accountable for those logs. So that's something we're gonna have to maybe include in the safety manual, the procedure, and it's something we're gonna have to work on. So I think maybe probably by the next meeting, because like you said, Cecilia's really good, she'll get right on this. So probably 6:30, we'll have this one ready to close.
That's it. I just really want to thank staff too. Good job.
Yeah, nice job. Thank you.
job.
Yeah, you should have seen the last fleet audit. I wanna say there was like
Let's
20
never go
findings
back
or
there
something.
again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's only 6. I was pretty happy with it.
So do we want to motion the ones that we're
You want me to
closing?
do that?
Yeah.
Okay. I move to approve the vehicle fleet operations assessment of internal control and procedures, internal audit report, and accepting all and closing items, recommendations 2, 4, and 5.
I'll second.
Favor? Okay. Aye.
Hi.
And a vote.
Would you open voting? Clear voting?
Oh, there you go.
There you go.
Boom. Okay, great, thank you.
And I thank the auditors too. That was a good job by all. Thank you.
Guys, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Back to the agenda.
See how much more we can close, huh?
Up for possible actions in 6B is discussion and possible action regarding the monitoring, review, and closure of internal audit findings, and there were recommendations involving audit findings tracking report, providing a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors to close completed findings and/or recommendations. Sherry?
Yep, this is our normal findings tracking report that we go over every audit and determine what can be closed. And I'm going to recommend that we do the first one on the first page, temporary staffing. I think we're ready to close that. There was a letter provided by Todd Reese at the DA's office, who is here, hopefully still on the line to go over that. He does have to leave at 4:30, so,
Okay.
but he should be here.
I am here, Sherry. This is Todd.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Chair, if it would, I guess what I'll do is go over very briefly my memorandum, and if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to entertain questions. On the temporary staffing audit, the observation was that Department of Labor considerations may indicate an employment relationship between Carson City and the temporary employees and the city hires, and that there were specifically 4 individuals who had completed 2 or more assignments over a 5-year period, with 1 individual having completed 6 assignments altogether. And they recommended the city conduct an evaluation on the legal risks identified in the internal audit. Tracking down at the last audit committee meeting, I believe the committee expressed concern about PERS and how PERS is applied to the city's use of temporary employees through Marathon. In general, as to the distinctions between people who have an employment relationship with the city, that generally refers to the distinctions between independent contractors and employees. The FLSA, the federal government, has a test for independent contractors and employees called the economic reality test that tests for several items, and as far as who has control of the employees and the employees' performance and other things like that. In general, the economic reality test isn't really applicable to temporary employees because they're not independent contractors. They are employees. And temporary employees, I'm addressing that term both as to temporary employees that the city itself would hire, so it would be a temporary employee of the city, or temporary employees hired through Marathon. Um, skipping ahead a little bit, temporary employees hired through Marathon, as far as federal the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act and the FMLA, the federal regulations, those tend to treat employees hired through staffing agencies as dual employees. So they're an employee of the staffing agency first, or joint employees, or joint employers. They are employees of the staffing agency first, but they are also employees of the city. So through the FLSA or FMLA, excuse me as I stumble over acronyms, um, the 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 city could be held liable for violations of FMLA or FLSA, even though it's hiring temporary employees through Marathon, and that's under federal law. Under state law, it's generally treated a little bit different. As far as NRS Chapter 608, I wasn't really able to find the reference that the audit made to the specific statute that the audit referred to in Chapter 608, but I did review Chapter 608 and spoke with our Human Resources Department, and I didn't see any didn't come across any red flags or any situations where the city wasn't aware of the requirements of Chapter 608 or complying with them. Moving on to, let's move on to PERS in particular. PERS treats the employment relationships between Marathon and or a person employed by Marathon and a person employed by the city differently. They don't treat that as a joint employment scenario. They treat that as the person being hired by Marathon is employed by Marathon and is not a city employee, and so is not entitled to PERS. Whereas if a temporary employee is hired by the city, then the temporary employee is entitled to PERS benefits after a 6-month period, assuming that the temporary employee is working on a full-time basis. That's kind of a brief overview and summary of my memorandum. I don't, based on what I've reviewed, the law I reviewed, and my conversations with the Human Resources Department, I wasn't able to identify any red flags or any areas where the city was not complying with all of the applicable laws. And so I'll leave it at that, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
A quick question, Todd. Are all temporary employees of the city, every one of them goes through one of these employment agencies like Marathon?
No, we do have some temporary staffing that goes to Marathon, but we also have part-time employees here too. It just depends really. A lot of times if we know an employee is gonna work over 1,039 hours, we'll hire them through Marathon. If we know they're only gonna work 3 months, instead of pulling them onto our city system, we'll just hire them through Marathon agency. So we really do analyze each employee and decide what the best route is.
So more like seasonal employees, or?
Some seasonal employees, yeah, we might just hire through Marathon, depending on how long they work. Some of the lifeguards come every single
Mhm. Okay. Okay.
I just have a general question.
Sure. Lori.
So, Mr. Reese, if I can just summarize in my mind after I did read this, I want you to know I did read it. What you're indicating is primary employer being Marathon, secondary employer being Carson City, that our relationship is to ensure, for instance, that they do take their 15-minute break or that they do get their lunch period, that we are not obfuscating the rules by saying, "Oh, that's your employer's problem, Marathon, to worry about it," but that we actually are making sure they're getting rest periods, meals, and things of that nature. So that's where our liability is, just to ensure we're not demanding they work straight through and not get a lunch. So that's where our potential liability would be there, but as long as we're complying with, that we monitor and comply with those, you think we're fine, in essence.
Yes, that's correct. Effectively, what you've identified is kind of the joint responsibility for, especially under the federal laws. The city does, I believe, have an obligation to work with Marathon to ensure that the employees are getting the breaks, the lunches, and in general the benefits they're entitled to, and I believe the city does endeavor to do that.
Thank you.
Are we aware of any cases where these longer-term employees through Marathon have filed grievances as far as being eligible for state benefits and stuff like that? And not only, I'm not talking just Carson City, but have we seen that at all, at the state level or county or, another city within the state of Nevada that we're aware of?
I am not aware of any, no.
Okay.
I did do some research into the case law involving PERS and the Attorney General's opinion involving PERS, and I did not find any temporary staffing cases that had come before either the Attorney General or the state courts. I'm not aware of any grievances either, but Melanie might have more knowledge than I do.
And then,
Good afternoon, Melanie Bruchetta, HR Director. Since I've been in the position since 2010, I have not received any grievances or complaints from employees, temporary employees requesting to be recognized as city employees.
That's because they want to keep their PERS. They're not going to complain.
no, I was talking about Marathon employees.
Well, the reason the long-term ones are because they're receiving PERS as retired state employees, so they want to keep that benefit and work on the Marathon contract.
Oh, yeah.
That's
good.
the advantage,
Got it.
is for them to be able to,
Got it.
yeah.
Double dippers. Yeah. Todd, just wanted to get your opinion on, you're saying that there's some conflict between the federal law here and state law as far as this area is concerned. Sound like, at least from your description there, it sounded like there was a little bit of conflict.
Your description is accurate. There is a little bit of conflict as to how the federal law and the state law treat employees that are employed through staffing agencies. With the federal law treating it as more of a joint employment aspect, and the state law, especially PERS, treating it as separate employment. Now, I'm not sure, I didn't see any reported cases involving NRS Chapter 608 or any of the, for instance, minimum wage or wage and hour type complaints that had to do with state law as opposed to federal law. And I could see, Nevada adopting kind of a joint employment scenario as to those requirements. That, to my knowledge, that hasn't been done yet, but it seems like an open door.
Okay. That was my interpretation too. Thank you. Questions, comments, guys?
You want to close one at a time or go through the whole list and then at the end close? I am recommending closure on this one.
Right. I don't have any problem with closure
Yeah,
on this one.
I don't either. Just,
Yeah,
do we
close.
need-
We can do the motion as discussed on the record. and
Okay,
that'll
sounds
cover
great.
it. So we all agree this one's closed.
Okay.
Sounds great.
Means we got you out of here on time, Todd.
Yeah, thanks, Todd.
Thank you.
Barely, but we did it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, appreciate the write-up too. Thank you.
All right, so the next one is cash handling audit. I believe we can close that one too. I'm pretty excited. The cases of COVID have decreased, and so the treasurer finally agreed to start up their cash audits again this week. I asked who they were going to audit, and they wouldn't tell me because it's supposed to be a surprise.
Yeah, it would
I
defeat
should have
the
known
purpose.
that. I know, I should have known
Yeah.
that. So I'm asking that this one be closed as well.
I don't have any problem closing it. She's doing it. That's what we wanted.
Yep, I'm good.
Okay, the next one is the social media study, and they have been working very hard on this one. There's a bunch of policies involved. The social media policy is done and in place. I think the last little approval is the city manager and policy tech has to hit the approval button. But it's done, it's actually implemented. So that's item 3, 4, and 12. And then on item 8, that's the archiving system that is in place. And they're all the departments are under the scope of that. I think last time I reported to you that the health department still wasn't quite under it, but now all the departments are under the same scope. In item 10, this is the same archiving system. This is for deleted items. So again, I'm recommending closure on that. And then 11, this was also the archiving system, but there was that disclaimer that you guys wanted to add, and that has been added. So I was recommending closure on that one as well.
Okay, so the only ones that are, there's only 2 remaining open?
There's 3.
3?
So on number 5 and 6, that's the unacceptable behavior policy and the computer resource usage policy. So unfortunately, this social media hits a bunch of different other policies that we're trying to get updated.
Okay.
So they're in line, and those 2 policies aren't quite there yet. The DA's office is still making some tweaks. And then the information security response plan, number 13, that's not quite there yet either. I believe James Underwood is on the line if you have any questions about that, but he's working on it.
Do we have an ETA, James?
James Underwood, Chief Information Officer for the record. Yes, I believe the ETA of 6/30/21, as indicated on the document, is reasonable to have that in place.
Great,
Okay,
thank you.
thank you. All right.
Yeah, I don't have any problem closing as recommended.
No, those look good to me.
Okay, so we're going to close 3, 4, 8, 10, 11, and 12, just so it's on the record. Thank you. And then the IT vulnerability audit. None of these are quite ready to be closed, but James is on the line to talk about where he is with all of these, because if you remember correctly, all of these represented underlying findings that we didn't want to make public. So I'll give it to you, James.
Okay, perfect. Well, first of all, I want to say we've been making good progress, and staff has really put a lot of effort, overtime effort, into making some progress on the findings. We We had 13 external findings that were high, medium, and low. There was only one low out of that group. 5 of those have been resolved. 2 of them are external vendor systems. They're not city run, so we've put requests into the vendors to remediate those issues. 5 of them have to do with a single system that we're working with a vendor to get updated. So we'll need some vendor assistance and some server updates for those 5. And then 1 of 13 is scheduled to be completed within the next few weeks. So we've made good progress there. Of all of the internal and external vulnerabilities that were identified that were high or critical internally, or all of them externally, we have put numbers to those in terms of how many hours we think we need to spend to fix those. We've got about 400 hours of work to do, so that'll be something that we're focusing on over the next few months. We feel we can make some good progress and show good progress by the time that we do the next vulnerability scan. This is also, I just want to mention, it's a constant journey. Things come up all the time that we have to add to the list. There's 2 examples in March that were highly critical and highly risky for our environment. Staff did a great job remediating one of those within 24 hours of when the patch was released, and the other one within 10 hours. So we are monitoring for things that we do believe are extremely critical, and putting those in addition to what was listed. So with that, I'd like to offer to answer any questions that you might have.
Yeah, we don't have any questions at this point, James. Appreciate the update.
All right. Here.
Thanks so much, James.
Yeah, thank you.
And then the last one I had in there was the fleet management audit, and I always include them just like I did last time for the IT audit, but I don't expect any closures. But I'm very excited to say that in the last item, we decided we're going to close item 2, 4, and 5, correct?
Correct.
All right, just so it's discussion on the record. Great.
Works. So we need a motion.
You want me to do it? Okay. I move to close the internal audit findings as recommended and discussed on the record by staff.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. All right, page. All right, item 6C is the discussion regarding the fiscal 21 audit program work update and hotline activity. Bailey?
Thank you, Audit Committee Chair. This is Audrey Donovan again. The status of the 2021 audit plan is we have delivered the vehicle fleet audit as planned. We have kicked off the engagement of accounts receivable. I know it's a longer word than that. Citywide revenue and accounts receivable audit. We've kicked that off, and we are, I'm guesstimating here, about 40 to 50% complete, and that will be ready for readout at the next audit committee meeting. And we are kicking off the annual risk assessment next week, which is the first week of April, which we've done in prior years. In this case, we will be reaching out to all the department heads via email and scheduling time with the departments of higher risk and exposure to the city. We have one audit noted that will be included on the audit plan, but I will wait to reveal the entire plan when it is completed at the next audit committee meeting. and we are on time, on track, and on budget. We have had a few hours to the follow-up activity with regards to accounts payable and P-card. We have had 0 activity when it comes to the fraud hotline. So no tapping that, but either hardly any of the budget on follow-up, but not tapping any of the budget on the fraud hotline. And that's the status update for 2021.
A real quick question on the fraud hotline. Is that advertised anywhere, like to employees and to the
Yes,
public?
it's actually all over our website
Okay.
and walls. I believe we all have it posted in our departments as well.
Okay.
Even the ladies'
Yep.
room. It's like, oh, I should
Okay.
comment.
All right, any questions, comments on that? Sounds like we're doing good. Appreciate it.
Our next meeting.
So, we don't have any public online, so there's no public comment. And
Still haven't legally asked for it, but when are we
yeah.
gonna do the next meeting?
I was going to do it during public comments since we don't have a next meeting item on the agenda. But I was thinking June 22nd or the 29th. That should give Audrey time to finish the receivable and the risk assessment so she can have some good recommendations for the 22 audit. Do those dates work for you, Audrey?
Say those again. You said June 29th?
Or the 22nd?
I can do the 22nd.
And I can do either. I've got flexibility on both of those days. Let me just check Kim
Either's fine.
Higgins' calendar. Either looks good. Mhm.
And Lori, you
Prefer
said
the
you have a conflict on the
22nd.
29th?
Well, I
Okay.
prefer the 22nd.
Okay.
I can make either work.
Okay, so we'll try to schedule it up for the 22nd, see how that works out. Yeah. 3:30 or 1:30?
I like 3:30, but
Can we do earlier though, so it doesn't go
Oh.
too late?
because you have somebody else.
Well,
that
just
needs
because
the
we're
room.
talking risk assessment and the whole 22
Want to do
plan.
Maybe,
If we could do 1:30, that'd be great. Or 2.
1:30.
Okay, 1:30.
1:30 on
It says so in the
22nd?
calendar now.
Okay. 1:30, June 22nd. Thank you.
Okay, great. With that, the meeting's adjourned.
Thank you, Audit Committee.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, I Bailey folks, and everyone else that joined.
Job.
Nice job.
And good job, staff. and
Thank
all
you.
Your hard
Good
work.
afternoon.
Thank you very much.
There are voting and